So, welcome everyone. Welcome to the 22nd global chat that we've held. Um, it's a fantastic community, and it's always about thought-provoking leadership with amazing guests that are curious about life, humans, and leadership. So, we all get to explore those topics together in provocative ways. All you need to get the most from today's session is your presence, your attention, and your open-mindedness. And sometimes your presence alone is quite hard to get in the busy world that we're in. So just center yourself and allow yourself to be fully present to today's session. Our focus this session is on the inclusive leader, something leaders are really exploring and grappling with at the moment, and is evolving as a field of thinking as we speak. Now, we were already getting curious even before the call and wondering what had attracted so many guests in particular to this global chat. We've held many before, but so many more, almost double the number than normal. So if you wouldn't mind entertaining us briefly in the Zoom chat, just pop what attracted you personally to join today's call? How come you are investing your attention, your time in the topic for today? Was it my hairstyle? Was it ISIS's profile? Was it the topic that really genuinely got you in, or the fact that you're looking at two twins, me and Tim, Tim's first hosting experience? Whatever it was for you, just take a moment and capture what attracted you to this session. Just while you're capturing that, I'll continue the intros, hopefully not interfering with your thinking too much. So the opportunity today is to create a sense of together that allows people to belong and show up as the best versions of themselves. And that's an aspiration for many leaders. How do I create an inclusive culture that allows my team to show up and be their best? It continues to evolve, and as it evolves, let's face it, the teams might not just be made up of humans. We may have AI augmented colleagues. We might have agents on that team. So this world is really changing quite dramatically. Now, the world is complex, and so are we. And ironically, in reality, by being a unique human being, we are already neurodiverse. Every single person on this call and in the world thinks differently. So we're going to explore that. And we've got no one better than Isis to explore that with us. She's a deeply engaging and curious person who has done a ton over the last 10 years of research exploring in this space, as well as working with organizations to help them to create more inclusion, belongingness. She's got deep lived experience, so she doesn't just talk from a knowledge base of the research, it's a practical lived experience, as many of us have. And so we'll share ideas in a provocative and unlock way today, and you'll see that happening live in a moment. To prime us first, I'd just love to share a little quote that I came across in my early 20s when I was doing some insights discovery accreditation training. We see the world not as it is, but as we are. It relates to what we used to call filters and beliefs, and more recently has been known as cognitive bias. And so, with the work we do on consciousness and the leadership mindset, we explore these kind of concepts a lot with leaders all around the world, including Salesforce, Target, and others. So, let's explore some of this together now with Isis. And I know you'd love to say hi, as would Tim, and then get us into a couple of questions to get the flow going. So, Isis, over to you to say hi to the crowd, and we'll get Tim to say hi as well, so his dulcet tones are engaged with, and then we're off and running.
Thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. So excited to be here with you. This is my favorite convergence of topics ever. So this is going to be a lot of fun. And hope I don't go on too long. I'm not going to say anything else right now. And let Tim say hi before we dive in.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. Tim Davison, located in San Diego. I have the pleasure of knowing Isis for about a little over 3 years now. So it's been quite some time that we've been getting to know each other, and we always end up having some of the most awesome conversations, and I'm excited to share her with you all. So.
Beautiful. Thanks, Tim.
Awesome.
Thanks,
Thanks,
Isis.
Tim.
So, yeah, I'll hand the ball over to you, Isis, to wax lyrical and let's see where it goes.
Thank you. So we wanted to start with a couple just thought-provoking questions. And I'm going to contextualize this first one by saying, I'm autistic. And as a child, I didn't know that for one thing. For a second thing, I came into the world really like a blank slate in a lot of ways in school and all of this interpersonal situations, social situations. I felt like I was constantly misreading them or not understanding what was going on. So this first question for you is, what are your priorities in an interpersonal situation? What I mean by that is when you're interacting with other people, having conversations with other people, whether it's in your personal life or at work, what are your priorities? What are you focused on as the outcomes of that? What do you think is most important to do? For me, it was always exchanging information. I'm learning things from you, you're learning things from me. That's why I was saying right at the beginning of the call, I would correct people's pronunciation and things like that all the time. So I'm like, don't they want to learn? Or I'd be very blunt, right? Very quote unquote honest. As I said at the time, just brutally honest. I really defined myself that way for a long time. Um, some people, maybe it's to make the other person feel good. Maybe it's to come away with that person having a high opinion of you, right? Like we don't think about this. So really curious to see your reactions to that question. What are your priorities? Sorry, what are your priorities in an interpersonal situation? Connecting authentically. Love that. Hmm. Connection. A lot about connection. Yeah, wow. Yeah, understanding, being understood, a lot of mutuality, right? A lot of reading what is the other person needing from this interaction? What's landing with them? What's not landing with them? How can I adjust even, my body language, my tone, like all of these things to make them feel more comfortable and engaged in the interaction, right? Yep, matching energy through genuine connection. Right. So many of these things, were invisible to me as a child and a young person, and a lot of other people who are neurodivergent in different ways. Some neurodivergent people are much better at reading, social cues and body language, even than neurotypical people. That's someone who's not neurodivergent. So it's like Mark was saying, every person's bringing a totally unique profile to the situation. But where the challenge arises is when someone's interacting with someone like me in my, teens or early 20s and thinking that I'm having this same interplay of mutuality that they're having when I'm not, and interpreting and parsing all of my behaviors and all of my opinions and everything else through that lens of thinking the way that they think, right? So that's what we're really trying to get at here is what does it look like to interact successfully, to build relationships successfully, while also understanding and accepting that this other person might not think the way that I think at all. And where do we draw the line, with those assumptions that we make? So another question to kick us off is, in what ways do you have to pretend to be something you're not in order to fit in at work? You might have heard the term masking in the neurodivergent community. It's basically pretending not to be autistic, pretending not to be ADHD, or trying to hide or downplay those traits. But as a lot of people in this community will say, everybody seems to be masking all the time. It just might come easier for other people. So again, the question is, in what ways do you have to mask or pretend to be something you're not in order to fit in at work? And it doesn't have to be today in your career, right? Maybe it was earlier in your career, or maybe there's a different context you find yourself in where you really see yourself doing this more than others. Yeah, Ian preempting, right? What I'm saying there. Luckily, hopefully, you find yourself in a place where you stop doing that, or you don't feel the need to do that anymore. But hopefully, it's an experience that we're all familiar with, right? If you can think back to doing that, or when you first start out in your career, where do those pressures come from? What does it feel like trying to navigate that and doing a lot of trial and error? Yeah, being thoughtful. Yeah, to bring that extroverted energy. Yeah, that's a really good example. Hmm. Very common in our social cultures, right? We look at Western cultures, for instance, right? This need to be positive, to be extroverted, to take up like airtime in a conversation, say something, right? You can't just stand there in a conversation and say nothing and just listen and observe, but in other contexts, that might not be a problem. Hmm. Yeah, Mark, you're really pointing to something that I think a lot of people struggle with. I just came out of I was mentioning doing this huge piece of neuro inclusion research and all these interviews, and a lot of people talked about the demands on how they had to show up at work meant that they were borderline nonverbal at home, or their family was just getting nothing from them because of those masking demands during the day. Yeah, an invisible illness, right? I think it's something like 82% of disabilities are invisible. And that's just among people in the professional workforce. Um, yeah, like how do you, that's a constant, and this is what a lot of neurodivergence is too, is an invisible disability, is just how do you downplay it? What kind of pain do you put yourself through to avoid another type of pain that will come from being marginalized or rejected or misunderstood? Hmm. Yeah, see, Brooke, that the honest opinions, right? When I was a child, I would hear honesty is the best policy. Always tell the truth, right? This is what was told to me as like the rules of, of life and existence. And then when I would share my honest opinion, I would get in trouble, right? I never understood, what is it you want me to do instead? You want me to lie? And that's why I would ask, like, so you're telling me to lie. You want me to lie? And they would say no, right? So that was something I struggled with for a very long time is what is the definition of lying in our culture? If not intentionally saying something that is not true. But apparently to a lot of people, that's not a lie, right? It's something else, right? And so it took me decades to unpack that. And a lot of people still in the workplace struggling with, I actually did this, someone brought this up as an example on a call recently, and I was like, I did that just like last year. I was on a project call and I basically said this whole thing isn't working, right? This aspect of the project is is failing. We should like totally change it. And someone got like very offended, or I realized later he might have been offended. He's like, tell us how you really feel. And I was like, I just did. Because I thought we were all on the same page because the data was so clear that this piece wasn't working. So I thought that's what we were talking about, but I didn't realize that stating that, so bluntly would come with negative consequences. So that happens rarely for me nowadays, but it still happens, and it was much worse earlier on. Um, Tim, Mark, what do you think we should dive into first, coming out of everything that we've seen in the chat on those first two questions?
I'll jump in. One of the things that I was just thinking about when it was popping up here is like you made me really stop and be conscious of like what my experience in my career was and how I've learned that, seeing things in a different way is an advantage, but also can be a disadvantage in a career. I'm curious, like, what like do you see as like maybe superpowers or like something along that you've run into within your career that you've seen it, this neurodivergence actually help evolve your career. So like where did those people usually fit and where does it fit for you?
Yeah, for me, and I think for a lot of people, it's a real double-edged sword, right? Because, I found myself getting taken advantage of and exploited and taken for granted a lot. I was just so productive. The first few years of my career, I was running productivity circles around everybody else at my level, and also extremely detail oriented. And so the things that were coming out for me were faster and higher quality and less likely to have mistakes. And so rather than getting, rapidly promoted and paid more money for that, I kind of got taken up by this mid-level leader who didn't have a lot of hard skills herself, I would later find, but was really, really good at like the politics of it all, right? Really good at kind of buttering up the right people and seeing which way the wind was blowing in terms of where, informal power structures were landing and all of that. And so she would get promoted kind of off of my work and then would pull me up behind her only as much as she had to keep me kind of right there, but also keep me invisible enough that other people weren't really aware of how much I was doing. And it led to, a very difficult dynamic between the two of us, of course. And at the same time, I did learn a lot because I was doing a lot way above my pay grade pretty early on and given a lot of responsibility, although without very little authority over that responsibility, right? Like I couldn't make the executive decisions myself, but was still expected to operate at like a very high level of efficiency and ability. But for me, that is directly related to being autistic because of my pattern recognition skills and my systems thinking skills and my ability to really lock in and be detail oriented and just like something that is like a tedious task. I'm like, this just has to get done. I have to check that these 500 things were done correctly in this big report that's about to go out. Like I'm just good at it, right? And I can tell with the way my mind works that it's all one thing, right? And at the same time, it goes with my complete inability to show a kind of deferential respect to someone just because they're in some place in a hierarchy, right? And this is something that came up in this research I was doing. People were volunteering this over and over. I was like, wow, I'm really not alone here. That we respect people based off of their contributions and off of their skill set. And so a lot of neurodivergent people do find themselves in situations where they're interfacing with someone who's very senior in their hierarchy, but isn't displaying any apparent skills or expertise that would be, what they think is a prerequisite for being in that place in the hierarchy. And so they're not going to show them deference. They're not going to show them subservience. And they are going to speak to them very plainly and tell them when they're wrong and tell them that their ideas are bad and that their plan for this product is bad. There's that's a whole path that really stymies a lot of our careers. And this is something, I dealt with that boss a lot. She could never trust me, right?
Yeah. It makes me also wonder, like, the environment in which we can create a space for, people who are neurodivergent and autistic inside of organizations, because there seems to be, some amazing spaces that, people who have this type of mind can really help accelerate, just like in your situation. So I'm wondering is like, what environments have you felt that have been like the most, I would say, safe environments that you've worked in, and how would you recommend, or how have you seen organizations create these environments to build like authentic human connections, or yeah, that's what I'm kind of thinking.
Yeah, I mean, the most important part is not being threatened, right? Like having a manager or leaders who are not, threatened by the people beneath them, especially in today's world when the pace of technological change is so rapid. You can't as a leader be, on top of everything. You need to be able to empower people and delegate and let them loose. And so I think for one, just table stakes, right? It has to be that kind of environment where that's the norm and that's expected of leaders. And in general, I think that accountability for managers as they're being promoted into management, as they're then being promoted into mid-level management and senior leadership, that they should be measured according to how they are enabling and empowering the people on their team. It shouldn't be so easy for someone who is, a micromanager who takes credit for everybody's work, but like really butters up all the people above them to just keep getting promoted in an organization, right? Like they should have to demonstrate that they are good at enabling the people that work for them. And so just as a baseline, having 360 reviews, but then also using the information that comes through in those 360 reviews to make decisions about who should be promoted and given that greater, span of influence rather than just, more control over more people who they can continue to kind of take advantage of, right? So I think the biggest part always comes back to managers and the culture around who gets promoted and what is expected of leaders in general.
Yeah, that's great. It makes me also think about, and I think you and I have had a little bit of conversations about this, is like just what's happening in the business world right now with all this uncertainty and ambiguity. Where do you see like people who are autistic or neurodivergent, where do you see them playing a critical part in all of this kind of chaos that's happening around us in some way, shape, or form?
Oh my gosh, I love this question so much because there's so many different reasons and ways, right? One easy, obvious one is we are definitely seeing neurodivergent professionals leading the way in large language model interaction and adoption of AI. And just like I actually had an interviewee say, the moment I interact with a large language model, I knew exactly how it works because it works the way my mind works. Right. And so the people that I see really successfully kind of extending their capacity and extending what they can do through AI are largely neurodivergent. The other piece is you need outside the box, like deeply outside the box, cross-functional, cross-industry innovations and ideas and solutions now. And I think it is neurodivergent people, especially those with the novelty seeking trait, especially those, again, with the systems thinking and pattern recognition, who come up with these really out there ideas and solutions that are cross-disciplinary in many cases. Another one that I don't talk about as much, but I also think is important is with the pattern recognition skills many of us have, we kind of had our existential breakdown crisis like 4 or 5 years ago about like, oh my gosh, look what's happening in the world, the meta crisis of the world, and every single thing, right? The climate change, the water scarcity, the fascism, like everything you can think of, right? Like kind of all coming together in this one like fabric of like, oh my God, I see it happening, it's happening. A lot of us had that kind of crisis and had to contend with that because we kind of were reading the tea leaves a while back, and now that other people are kind of just starting to figure out, okay, we have to do something, or we should change things, or how do we approach this? You know, AI was another big part of that crisis in a lot of ways and continues to be. And I just think people with strong pattern recognition skills have been thinking about and connecting these dots and are kind of calm under pressure and under that crisis these days, more than most neurotypical people who are more likely just kind of go with what's going on, right? Just go with the flow, or, oh, if nobody's panicking, I'm not going to panic. Like that kind of approach is really unusual in most neurodivergent people. We tend to have a really strong drive, and this is obviously a big generalization because neurodivergence spans an enormous spectrum, but a strong drive to discover the truth, to discover the why behind things, to connect seemingly unrelated things to each other. And that's why people with ADHD in particular are often seen as being really unfocused and really distracted. But that's just how they're parsed within our culture and our paradigm. They actually are just taking in a lot of information at once and looking for connections and talking about things or reaching for things or noticing things that seem, irrelevant in a more narrow context. So I could go on forever in response to that question, but those are the first few things.
No, that's great. I think it might be good to open up questions in chat too. So if you have a question, feel free to drop it into chat. I do have a quick question around, as people are thinking through their questions right now is like when we, in these environments, where, we're working with a whole bunch of different people, what would you say would be one of the biggest, like, things to help support them and them feeling safe in these in environments inside of an organization? And is there any like tips or tricks that you would tell anybody here about, like, what's going on, like how can you help support them?
Yeah, I think these are also universal practices that probably benefit everybody. But for us, the best ones are first, give until at least the third impression before drawing your conclusions about somebody. A lot of us really just rub people the wrong way the first time that we meet them. There's something off about us. Like even only with Zoom and the pandemic era have I learned how to make, the facial expressions I'm supposed to make in meetings and in conversations like this. Once the pandemic started, I would see myself in a meeting with like 12 people and be like, oh, everyone looks really enthusiastic about this plan except for her. She looks really disappointed and not enthusiastic. Oh my God, that's me. And so only then did I realize, some of this very ambiguous feedback I would get and what it was really referring to. And that's the next piece, is giving clear, continuous, actionable feedback, right? I think a lot of times we don't get feedback because people don't want to say out loud, like, you're rubbing me the wrong way, or I don't like your tone, because they know they're not supposed to say things like that. But what we need those people to do instead is interrogate what's really happening, right? What's going on there? Why do you feel that way, right? For instance, when I got feedback that I was too intimidating, and I really need to work on that from that same boss I was talking about earlier, and I didn't get any action items around it or any examples, I went and asked everybody on the team, not in an interrogating way because I didn't want to intimidate them, but in a pleading way because they knew I had a horrible relationship with this manager. And I was like, please tell me where this could be coming from or how I can implement this feedback. And I had independent conversations with all of them. And I got some feedback through those conversations that I wish I had gotten much earlier, which was when we were in these problem-solving meetings, when we were brainstorming together, I was always the first person to jump in with an answer. I was always the first person to kind of synthesize all the information and come out with an idea. And it was usually a pretty good idea. It was usually a pretty good answer. And no one else could come up with something that they felt like was better. And so over time, people just stopped thinking. They stopped offering ideas. They stopped engaging in that, process together. And so I learned from that, like, okay, it's good for me to take a beat, for me to be quiet and listen to what other people have to say, and then help, build consensus from there rather than jumping in and making people feel like, there's no space for them to think or speak, right? That's kind of what I drew out of having those conversations. Very different from the feedback that I was given. Still, the kernel behind that feedback was really important for me to receive, right? And so a lot of us are either getting this like tone and personality based feedback, we don't know what to do with it, and we don't have relationships like I had on that team where we can have those honest conversations, or we're just not getting the feedback at all. And we slowly get kind of marginalized and you realize, oh, no one likes me. I can't tell you how many times I've heard this story. I can tell that nobody likes me at my job. I don't know why, and I don't know what to do about it, but it's really sad. It's a sad, experience. And so giving people until at least the third impression, and also recognizing that this might not be the type of person you think they are, right? Like when I was in college, I think I was probably interpreted as like a mean girl, right? Because I had that appearance and because I spoke so forcefully and so quickly and so bluntly, I probably gave that, oh, this is someone who is mean to people, right? Whereas my like close friends would call me one of the nicest, kindest people that they had ever met. So that judgment could be preempted by being like, maybe that's just my projection. Maybe I'm just assuming that. What does the actual data say, right? What is the actual information? Before assuming someone's, just one more example is disengaged, right? Because they don't answer their Slack messages fast enough, or they're always off camera on a meeting, right? Before putting that feedback in their performance review, disengaged, maybe they're more engaged than anyone because being off camera enables them to actually focus on what's being said instead of performing all the facial expressions that they need to remember to perform so that they look like they're interested, or they're really hyper focused on something and they're like me, going 4 times faster, 4 times more productive than someone else on the team, but they're not answering messages as fast, right? So how are you measuring engagement? Is it the superficial kind of performance of appearances, or is there actual substance behind what's being delivered? So really trying to parse that is important too.
I love that. I love that. We have a couple questions in chat here. Let's go to the first one. So, Isis, what advice would you give leaders as they try to create inclusive cultures, particularly in remote teams?
I think it's important to be vulnerable and honest and to like practice that, right? I think we get into a bit of a gray area when we ask people to talk about their personal lives. I think a lot of leaders, especially on remote teams, and we all saw this during the pandemic, try to be like, what did everybody do on the weekend, et cetera. And that's kind of a minefield for a lot of people, right? Maybe someone is, like not out at work and they don't want to talk about their same-sex partner, or maybe the way they didn't do anything all weekend because they're decompressing and recovering from work, and now they're like scrambling to think of something to say that sounds normal, right? So I think instead of taking that approach, being really like talking about career stories, talking about your strengths, your weaknesses, the feelings you have about things that are coming up with work. I'm nervous about this presentation I have to give. Here's why. Here's a mistake I made in my career, and how it panned out, and like here's everything I learned from it. Right? Just having that time where you're offering, especially as a manager earlier, offering that kind of information and creating that psychological safety. That's really what it comes back to, right? When we talk about inclusive cultures, I think psychological safety is at the core, and psychological safety is about making it safe for everybody to learn, to make mistakes, to say, I don't know, right? So leaders and managers have such a huge role to play in role modeling that. And I do think that's the biggest piece for that question. There's a few other things, but again, I won't go on for hours.
Oh, you're great. There's another question in here. What tips or suggestions can you offer to how managers or leader can appreciate the range of neurodivergence when considering diversity in the workplace? So to avoid, some of the culturally prominent tropes.
Oh my gosh, I'm so glad that John referenced those too, because that's a big challenge for us, is like when people think of an autistic person, they don't think of me, they certainly don't. And a lot of people are they're like, yo, you're not autistic. You don't look autistic. I'm like, this is part of the problem, right? In fact, women weren't even assessed for autism until relatively recently. We weren't even part of the diagnostic criteria. It was all high socioeconomic status, white males, and the ways that they would display, these behaviors in childhood, which are very different for us. So all this to say, there's a lot of stereotypes, and Sometimes, we can be our own worst enemy because we want to just work hard. A lot of us just want to put our heads down and do the work and get, paid commensurate for that work. Don't necessarily care as much about title in a lot of cases, often don't want to be in manager positions, don't want to be in the spotlight. I'm someone who always was like a speaker and facilitator, and that came naturally to me. But I think you have to be, I think the most important thing is to be really on the ball about who is contributing what and how are they contributing it, right? Instead of like who talked the most in the meeting, right? Being like, what were the actual like outcomes and outputs from this person? Maybe you have someone who talks a lot in meetings and is really good at like consensus building, but they're not actually contributing anything of substance. So you need to be aware of your cultural conditioning to give that person more kind of gravity as a performer because they talk a lot and because they're articulate, versus, the person who might not say anything until called upon because they just think it's a waste of everybody's time for them to sit there and talk about, I had a very humbling moment with that as a manager many years ago where I had been leading this meeting. We had gotten maybe half of what we wanted to get done, or like half the problems we wanted to solve or reach alignment on. I had the power to make the decisions about what we would do, but I felt like this one person who was really smart hadn't spoken at all in the meeting. And so I followed up with her and I was like, hey, I know you think about these things. I know you're paying attention in that meeting. I would love to hear your thoughts. She sends me this like long, heavily formatted, email that basically solved all the problems that we had left unsolved, all the loose ends that need to be tied up right there. It probably took her, an hour or so to write that email, but that was how it made sense for her to contribute, right? So, a non-inclusive manager or a manager who's failing to account for the full range of neurodivergence would come out of that meeting and be like, that person's not engaged, that person doesn't contribute, they really need to start pulling their weight, right? Whereas an inclusive manager who does take that full spectrum into account might be like, oh my God, this is one of the best contributors I have on this team, right? So it really does come back to that perception. It's like the quote that Mark gave us earlier, right? You perceive the world as you are. If you really think that your way of thinking and your perceptions are the be all end all of human intelligence and how, work gets done, then yeah, you're gonna have a very narrow view on your talent.
Yeah, 100%. There's a couple of other questions, two more questions that we could ask here. One from Ian, who says that, he's got two grown children that are neurodivergent who have had needed to be supported and empowered at work, but paradoxically, those supportive and empowering skills are not in their kit bag in relation to others at work. Any suggestions?
Can I make sure I understand the question, saying that they don't have the skills to support and empower others? Is that?
There you go, Ian. Thanks, mate.
Yeah, no, essentially, I suggest because they need to be empowered and supported, but their skill set, they are both, thought comes out mouth immediately, right? And so often I think people at work feel, what are we supporting you for? You're not very supportive. That essentially,
Yeah.
that's the short version.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah. It is very challenging. This is something I continue to face, like with my husband, when he's like, you can't just be because you're autistic. They said that can't just be your, excuse for things. I'm like, sometimes it's an explanation, it's not meant to be an excuse, but this is a really big challenge because we have, this paternalistic relationship to neurodivergence in our culture and at work, right? So you might get people who are supporting you, but they're doing it in this very paternalistic kind of coddling way. Those same people that you just described in that example, right, would not probably tell your children, hey, that really hurt my feelings. Okay. If someone said that to you, it might not hurt your feelings. That's fine. You are not universal to all humans, right? It hurts my feelings. And here's why it hurt my feelings. It implied that I'm unintelligent, right? It doesn't matter if that was your intention or not. That was the impact. It implied that I am unintelligent, implied that I'm incompetent, it implied that this conversation is a waste of your time. Okay. And I cannot build a trusting working relationship with someone who makes me feel that way, right? They need to be able to have those conversations. We need our coworkers to be able to engage in that radical candor with us, or we cannot change these behaviors. We cannot see the forest for the trees. It's like I have a friend who I also interviewed for this research who had her direct reports used to be in her boss's office crying every day, and she had no idea. And it was because she never smiled at them, and she never said, please or thank you, like because that's just how she was. But the boss said to her, instead of saying, hey, you need to smile at people, which as a woman, she would have been like, no, I'm not doing that. Instead, he was like, one of them is in my office every day crying about how you hate them and you never smile at them and they feel like you want nothing to do with them. And the moment she felt empathetic to that experience of being rejected, which is one that she's very familiar with, as am I, from a lifetime of being autistic, she couldn't stop smiling. She's like, I actually have to like try not to be creepy about it now because now I'm smiling at them constantly and I'm praising them and all the time. It's like when I had a moment in high school where I realized I could just say the nice thoughts I have about people out loud. What if I just started saying like the complimentary things that come into my mind and I just started saying them to everybody? All of a sudden, the whole world changed, right? Everyone's like, oh my gosh, I would get these like very authentic and very specific, heartfelt compliments. I still do it to this day about like the way that people think. Like I had a friend a few months ago, I was like, I love the way you can really hold two ideas that contradict each other in your head at the same time and really see both of them simultaneously. It's so refreshing. So few people can do that. And it's incredible. And I'm learning a lot from you, you know? And that's just a thought that I had in my head that I just chose to say out loud, right? But it took people in my life telling me that they felt, you know, intimidated by me or condescended to me or felt bad about themselves around me. You know, people have to be vulnerable. And so that is the nut that we have to crack in these workplaces is why do we continue to see that vulnerability as weakness? I think it actually takes a lot of strength to be like, hey, that really hurt my feelings. Like that was not okay, right? You don't get to just run around hurting my feelings. Instead, they try to construct these like objective reasons why you shouldn't talk that way. And it never works. We never listen. We never change because we're like, well, those reasons made no sense. And we're very big on like the why. Why can't I do this? Why can't I say this? Why can't we do it this way? If no one's going to give us the honest answer that actually clicks, then we're not going to change. So I know that's not that helpful to you, Ian, because you're not in the position of these coworkers, but you could potentially explain in these situations how it likely made that person feel. This is why I'm very grateful to have such a neurotypical husband. He's the most neurotypical person I know. I often find myself relaying, you know, text conversations to him or laying out scenarios that have happened and being like, okay, how should I handle the next phase of this? Like clearly messed something up, or why did they react this way? What did I do that was offensive? And he can always explain it to me. And I learn a lot, but someone has to explain it. Someone has to articulate it. We cannot read minds. We cannot figure it out on our own. And I think that is actually, it's the biggest frustration I face in doing this work because I think so much more of the problems around neurodiversity than we realize are simply due to misunderstandings. Like they're not due to like a fundamental inability to do something or, you know, being fundamentally a jerk and that's just how you are and you're also autistic. It's like, it's just misunderstandings. It's neurotypical people assuming that we are doing things for certain reasons that are not accurate and us assuming they are doing things for certain reasons that are not accurate and nobody ever talking about it. I'll stop there.
No, you're good. You're good. Mark, anything to add or question? We have a couple other questions in here, but I wanted to get your
the whole
insights here.
conversation blowing my mind in a really good way. Particularly I'm left in a quandary as a leader. If I'm a leader that can hold polarities, two things being right, even though they conflict, I can't yet see how might I create an environment that allows that to be with people. So people in my team, one behavior works for one of them. It absolutely does the opposite for the other one. Both behaviors are valid for that person, but when they come together, sparks fly. How do we create? I mean, it's already quite a complex workplace and system that we're operating in. How do we create an environment that allows people to feel safe enough to have the real conversation about the miscommunication, even saying it might be really, really challenging for them? I
Yeah.
don't even know how to ask the question. It's so jammed in my head.
I understand. I actually have a specific example I'll try to share pretty briefly, which was I was a new person joined a team I was in charge of like this big project. I was sending out so many messages all day being like, all right, your turn with the deck. You're doing slides 3 through 12. You're over here. You're fact checking this. And then you're sending the slides back to me, blah, blah. And then this person kind of gets thrown into the middle of this project. And I'm like, all right, you have the second half of the deck. I need it back by 3 p.m. Here's the changes you have to make. And it was just like unacceptable to her, apparently, the way that I would like my tone, right? Like talking to her over these messages. I guess it sounded very terse and very demanding, but I literally did not have the time that it would take me with my paltry kind of social skills to like rewrite just the messages going to her to be the way that wouldn't offend her, right? And so this was like a real problem in our relationship or lack thereof. We had no relationship, and yet we were on the same team. And I don't know if this was on purpose or was just a coincidence, but very shortly after that, both of us got sent away on a business trip together for a week that we had to go do this thing together, just the two of us. And we were staying in the same hotel. We're next door to each other, we're having breakfast, lunch, and dinner together. Like we were just together, and we just got to know each other as people and see how much we had in common, right? Like I came to not see her as this soft little snowflake, butterball who also like was very slow compared to me on like all the shared tasks that we had. Like I had all this like resentment toward her, and she had come to the company through my boss who hated me, so that also was like, oh, you get to be her, good little friend who gets coddled and gets way less work than the rest of us, so that I'm over here doing all the work and getting in trouble because of my interactions with you. All of that went away when we got to build an actual human relationship with each other. And that's true of like humans everywhere, right? Like we do truly fundamentally have so much more in common than we lack. But when you're in these workplace only dynamics where you're just like trying to get work done and you're like jockeying for position in meetings and whatever it is, it's not enough, right? To break through that and to find that trust. So I know it's not feasible to send all of these people away on trips alone to work out their stuff together. But I think if the manager truly believes that these people have more in common than they lack, they are capable of achieving mutual respect and mutual trust. I just have to put them on maybe a complex or stretch project that requires a lot of like white space time and talking through things and throwing spaghetti at the wall and seeing what sticks. Like put them in a situation like that where they just have to interact with each other, and they have to pay attention to how the other person thinks, and they have to, have kind of personal life conversations because now they're meeting all the time and they're like attached at the hip on this project that they're leading together. Put them both in charge of one thing and don't give them, clear boundaries of like, this person gets to say so on this person gets like, nope, you're doing it together. That is, in my experience, that has been the best way to allow people to find that. But if as a manager, you think that they're just fundamentally incompatible, right? You're never going to give them the space or opportunity to discover that, right?
That's great. There's one question that a couple people have commented here, and this is one thing that was just popping up in my head too. It was around, is there like some type of like the heaviness or the tax on you for needing to remember how to act or how to change yourself, and to the degree which you mentioned, and if so, do you wish other leaders knew how to reduce this?
I mean, of course I wish that leaders knew how to reduce that. I will say a big crutch for me is being on Zoom, being on video where I can see myself. It makes it much easier and much less energy to make sure I am like looking the way I'm supposed to look. When I'm also 6'2", so when I'm in like a physical situation or like a networking situation or something, it's a constant drain on my energy. Being like, am I standing weird? Am I smiling weird? Am I looking at the person I'm supposed to be looking at? Am I touching my hair? Don't touch your hair. Don't do that. Like all of this stuff, like it just takes up so much space in my mind, So I do wish that people in general would just take each other at like the face value of the words that they say. But unfortunately, in our culture, we do the opposite. The words are kind of like the last, least true thing. It's all about body language. It's all about facial expressions. It's all about micro expressions. That boss I was talking about used to say like, well, your words are saying one thing, but your face is saying something else. I'm like, I don't have the energy to make my face say the same thing that my words are saying. I'm too tired from all the work that I'm doing. Can't we just move forward? Like, can't you just trust that I mean what I say and like punish me when something happens to the contrary? I think that's the easiest thing for anyone to do if they want to be a more inclusive leader. Like, just look at the data. Just give them the chance to create the data. If you think this person's terrible and unhelpful, has bad attitude, okay, wait until they produce the results that prove that objectively, right? Rather than just jumping to that conclusion out of the gate. But yes, to answer that question shortly, there is definitely a tax, and it's lesser on Zoom. I much prefer doing like, Zoom-based speaking and facilitation. But I think for other people, it's even worse. And even doing it on Zoom, some people can't stand to see themselves because they're like, oh my God, like it's worse to see yourself. But yeah, otherwise I'd be making a totally neutral expression. Sorry.
No, it's so interesting that you say that, Isis, because we talked about, this was kind of during the pandemic that we were talking about Zoom fatigue,
Hmm.
where we were on Zoom so much. And like, even right now, like we constantly looking at seeing, making sure that, my
Yeah.
glasses are straight or that my hair is the right direction, like that for me at least. But it's funny to not funny. I think it's just really interesting that like for someone who may be worried about all of that, like actually Zoom actually helps them do it. And that's just such a interesting new colliding perspective that you brought. So I just want to thank
Yeah.
you for that because that was like a major aha for me right now. So thank you.
And I do want to add, like on certain calls, if it's like problem solving brainstorming call, I really don't want to be on camera, right?
Yeah.
Because then people will perceive reactions to what they're saying in my facial expression when I'm actually just thinking like 4 steps ahead of the implications of the idea that they just proposed. I'm just thinking, but because they're used to seeing me make this pleasant expression and be so good at masking on Zoom, they will, even if they know I'm autistic, even if they've known me for years, it doesn't matter. They're still going to read into that. So I much prefer being off camera when I need to focus. And that's the frustrating thing is that we think people are off camera because they're not focusing, because they're doing something else, because they're ignoring the meeting. For a lot of us, we're much more focused if we're off camera and when we have to like solve a thorny problem. But the other piece I want to quickly add is I've grown to appreciate that I can get my message across. What I want to talk about, what I want people to hear, they hear so much more effectively when I mask on Zoom, right? So there's a certain like, you know, if I didn't mask at all and I was completely bald, which has been my dream for, a long time. Won't get into that right now. Actually, the two of you, we should have a conversation about that
Welcome
another
to the
time.
club, baby.
But like
Welcome to the club.
if that was the path that I took and I was just like, I just don't, I'm just not going to mask at all, then like no one would hear me, right? And like I would be misunderstood and misperceived and people would tune out. And like that would be so much more painful than having to, brush my hair every morning and monitor my facial expressions on Zoom, right? So that's another thing you'll hear a lot of people talk about if you really get into this with them. I know someone who's an executive that has a pain response to her own voice and was nonverbal as a child and only started speaking once she heard her parents discussing institutionalizing her when she was 3. And she was like, oh man, now I got to start talking or I'm going to get institutionalized, and it's just the echo of hearing her voice in her ears and also inside her skull. It's physically painful. It causes a physical pain response. But she's like, that's the pain of that is less than the pain of not having a voice in the world at all. So here we are, right? So that's a constant trade-off too.
Yeah. Mark, anything to add? There's a couple other questions in here that are good questions, but just
I'm
anything
just
that you have.
super keen to hear when your book's coming out, Isis, in whatever form that might be, because the world has talked about IQ, it's talked about EQ, which for some who are neurodiverse would just consider to be superpowers of masking, SQ, which is spiritual quotient, and then maybe there's an NQ, neurodivergence quotient, just an ability to be with, understand, and fully embrace all aspects of ways of thinking and do it in a way that invokes the very best in people. Um, you are often involved in big research projects. Are you going to consolidate that, see the patterns, and share something in a way that's more accessible? Because people are really keen to understand, in addition to your talks and what you share, like, how do I do this in a really meaningful way in a world that needs it right now?
No, this research report is coming out October 9th, so very soon.
Woo! Cool.
I guess I don't know. Follow me on LinkedIn or something. I'll post it there. So I'm so bad at LinkedIn. I hate. I actually have never said that sentence before, but people want to make sure they see it, or I can send it to you guys. You can send it out. It's going to be publicly available. I'm very excited about all of the misperceptions that we're delving into. It's a long white paper, and I actually would love. There was a question I saw in here about like my husband saying you can't use it as an excuse, and people seeing neurodivergence as an excuse, and like what is the solution there, right? Like how do you get through that? And I think, and again, this is not something that can be, globalized, but every single person on this call can do this, and it makes a much bigger difference than you realize, is to look at yourself and the ways that you have whittled down yourself, the ways that you pretend or lie to yourself, right? Probably people on this call aren't doing it as much as your average worker, but the thing that we really activate, it's the same thing, honestly, that a lot of like gender nonconforming and non-binary and trans people activate is this, oh, you're not allowed to just exist like that. You have to fit this mold. You have to act this way. And these are people who have done that to themselves, right? Kind of done that self-harm in order to find social acceptance. And everyone's done it to some degree in some way. Why do you dress the way you do? Why do you style your, facial hair the way that you do, right? Like, why do you, downplay the limp that you have because you sprained your ankle? You know what I mean? It's like these are all things that we're doing that if we really interrogate them are showing that we associate, physical, weakness with inferiority, for instance, right? Or lack of social grace with inferiority, being worth less as a person. They reflect fundamentally that we believe there are people that are fundamentally superior to others. That's one thing I bring up a lot. I'm like, if you think that there are people who are fundamentally superior to other people or fundamentally inferior to other people, then you are absolutely operating and behaving in ways that are reinforcing the same barriers that I and so many people like me face, in the workplace every day. So it really is like having to go in and be like, why does it bother me that this person is acting this way or being this way? Like, why does it, what wound is that activating in me? Because it is not about them. It is about us when we have those reactions.
I am mindful of time, Tim and Isis, so I think it'd be quite useful just to allow and get a sense of what's settled in the audience, like what's landed for folks. And this, for those that know our B3 approach, we've already done the be conscious at the start. We've been curious in the session, and we're now in that be better. Like, what's the takeaway? So, key question: what have you learned about yourself today? I'll start you with that, and then I'll hand back over to Isis to unlock the next questions when you've just had a minute or so to think about it. So, what have you learned about yourself today from the conversation and the reflections so far? Just make a note for yourself.
That quote Tim shared is so spot on. I'm just so grateful for it. Thank you, Tim.
It wasn't me. It was RuPaul, just so everyone knows. That's RuPaul's quote. So it makes
It
it even
wasn't you.
better.
You didn't just come up with that
No,
off top of the
no, not
sound.
at all.
I know.
I thought, what a total genius. So, what have you learned about yourself? And the second one, before I hand back, I know there's a couple of more questions in our pre-notes there, Isis. What's your biggest takeaway from today's conversation? So, what's the takeaway? Maybe something that you can consciously put into practice in your life. So, what's your biggest takeaway from today's conversation? Could be for you, could be for your kids, like for you, Ian, as you were describing them, could be for your colleagues or your team. What's your biggest takeaway?
I think there's plenty with those two questions, so I don't think we need to throw any more at them.
I just love the next two so much. I couldn't. It's like, I want to ask them. The reason I want to ask the next two is because they kind of bring the focus down even more. So it takes it
Mhm.
down the funnel. So we thought about what have we learned and our takeaways. The next one is around after you've heard what you've heard today, how are you going to approach your interactions differently with those who clearly think and perceive in ways that are unfamiliar to you? How will you approach interactions differently with those who are clearly different from you? They perceive things in a different way than you do. So just bringing the focus right down to difference and how you'll act and engage. And then this real gem, I think for sure it came from you, Isis, because it's such a big unlock question. Where can you take opportunities in work or life to think more divergently? Whatever
I
that
should
means
really,
to you now.
well, we never really defined, I mean, not that it can truly be defined, but just so anyone who hasn't heard this concept before, we're all conditioned to think convergently, right? You take a set of facts or a set of, disparate opinions and you converge on an answer, you converge on a consensus. But anyone is capable of thinking divergently, where you kind of start with a question or an idea and you follow it somewhere else. And it's kind of like spider web thinking, and you might end up landing somewhere you never expected to be, or finding connections you never expected to encounter. And often, we're perceived as changing the subject or being off topic when we're actually, we're trying to think or engage divergently. So I just want to throw that out there too, because everyone's capable of doing this.
Yeah, the phrase thinking out of the box came into my mind, but there might not even be a box if you're a divergent.
If you're divergent, you struggle to get in the box.
Cool. I'll loop back to you, Tim. In a moment, I'll pop in the chat just a couple of things that are coming up and talk to them in the last minute or so. So back with Tim and Isis. Anything else you want to share, provocate, acknowledge as we round out our time together with the audience?
No, I just want to thank Isis for there's been a lot of comments about just like your ability to be able, and I've even talked to us of knowing, getting to know you over the last couple of years is just sometimes I walk away and I'm like, wow, I was not thinking that way, or wow, that's such a different and interesting perspective, or I need to get more curious. I mean, or just like, Isis and I have had conversations that have gone into totally different things too, about talking about dreams and things like that. And I just want to thank you for just being so open and honest and just being yourself, because we love you just being who you are. And this is just such a beautiful moment of bringing you into this group of people and sharing them with you, or sharing you with them. Yeah, so thank you.
Thank you. It's always such a pleasure and so affirming to be with a group of people who really care about this topic and are interested in listening and seeing that it's landing. I mean, we just, like I said, we have so much more in common if we can just touch, the shared humanity in each other instead of judging each other off these superficial, social performances that don't really say that much about who we actually are. We can all find so much more community and connection. Like that's true for everybody, right? Like to just be honest about where we're, not being our authentic selves. And that's one of the greatest gifts that a lot of neurodivergent people can offer is they can't help but just be the way that they are. So when you strip all of that away, you can find some really incredible friends, incredible relationships, connections, ideas. It all just starts with ourselves. You don't need to go out and learn about bipolar, OCD, ADHD, autism, ADHD. That's what a lot of leaders think. Like, I need to learn all these things and then I'm going to grasp it. It's like, you're never going to grasp it. Don't worry about it. Grasp yourself. Look at your own conditioning. If you think in binaries a lot, learn that you think in binaries a lot, and then notice when you're doing binary thinking and then try to do the opposite, right? We all have the power to unlearn through our own lens and experience. You don't need to go out and get the information from somebody else.
Oh, I'd really love to just reinforce what Tim has said there, Isis, about your vulnerability and openness. It's just really refreshing for people to see someone just showing up as themselves. And also to the audience, like even just in uh, putting time and attention into today's call, you've shown that you're open and seeing the world in a different way, and you've got courage and you've got curiosity. So just want to applaud you for being here, exploring this space with us, because it can be quite um, provocative. It can really make you do flip-flops in your head and do a back somersault and go, what the hell? How am I supposed to engage with it? So applaud you all for being here. As promised, we've got a couple of events coming up that I just want to give you a heads up on, which I'm popping in the chat. I'll talk about the first, Tim, if that's right. If you just touch on the second, which is the land. So for those of you that are already here for Global Chats, brilliant. And the next session that I think you'll absolutely love is with one of the leaders that we've been working with for a good period of time now at Salesforce. So this is the whole world of adaptive leadership and the future of leadership. What's coming down the pipe, agentification, what's changing in the world, how are they responding, and how have we partnered in a way to do that from a really insightful and deep thinking client who will be sharing their thinking with us. It's New Zealand time, 21st of October, so same as like this week on the Tuesday morning for us in New Zealand, for Australia a little bit earlier, for the US on the Monday at this time. So join us if you can for that. And Tim, you got a wickedly cool land coming up, so tell us about that.
Yeah. Absolutely. So if anybody is located in the San Francisco Bay Area, we're doing what we call is a leadership action network. And this is just where we get a whole group of really smart people in a room and we talk about how we can actually turn leadership into actionable results. And so we're having a discussion about how HR and L&D leaders need to and how they can adapt and shape AI as, we were just talking about how agents and all that is happening in the worlds around us is how can we shape the future as L&D leaders. So that's going to be on October 9th at Workday's headquarters.
Beautiful. And as always, we'll be sharing the upload of this recording on our YouTube channel with all of the different recordings from the past. If you've not seen some of the previous guests that we've had, just have a scroll through, see what resonates, click in, watch a few of them. And of course, when you can, join us live for a highly interactive session, because I tend to find when people's attention's live in the session, it unlocks thinking. But for some of you, you might prefer watching the recording. Like Isis said, different strokes for different folks. If the camera's off, it might mean I'm just thinking deeply about it. Go away, enjoy your fantastic day, make the most of the new thinking, moving from binary to diverse. And again, a huge thank you, Isis, for your time today. It's been fantastic. Enjoy the rest of your day, folks. See you soon.